He had always been drawn to music, not in a casual way like most children, but with a deep, almost unexplainable need. Every time he heard a piano, whether it was the faint notes from a neighbor's house or the full-bodied sound from the music school at the end of the street, he felt as if a part of him was coming alive. It wasn't just that he liked the music. He needed it. It was a place where he felt safe, free, and understood without having to speak a word. His fascination started very young. Even before he could properly pronounce most words, he would hum along to melodies he heard on the radio or from the television. But it was the piano that captured him completely. Its keys, arranged in black and white patterns, seemed like a secret code to a world he wanted to explore. He didn't just want to play. He wanted to touch, to feel, to understand every note and the way it could make someone feel something they could not easily describe. Every day after school, he would walk past the music center, slowing down at the entrance to hear the piano from inside. Sometimes, a lesson was in progress, and the sounds would float through the open doors, filling the street with music. He would stand there, mesmerized, as the notes traveled through the air and into him. Other children ran past, talking loudly or chasing each other, but he stayed rooted, as if the music had a pull he couldn't resist. People walking by sometimes noticed him and smiled at how absorbed he looked, but he never paid attention. Nothing else mattered in that moment except the sound and the longing that came with it. At home, he improvised. His parents didn't have a piano, but they had an old table with worn wooden surfaces. He would tap on it with his fingers, trying to mimic the rhythms he had heard. His small hands would slide over the edge, pretending it was a real keyboard, imagining the notes and harmonies he longed to play. Sometimes he made simple tunes, sometimes chaotic bursts of sound, but every time he felt closer to the real thing. Music was becoming a part of him, almost as if it were a language he had been born to speak. His parents noticed his fascination and admired his dedication, but they didn't know how to nurture it. They had no piano at home, and lessons were expensive. They could see, though, that this wasn't a passing interest. He would stay up late listening to recordings, replaying songs over and over, trying to figure out how the pianist's fingers moved. They bought him small music books and even a tiny keyboard, but it was never quite the same. His heart was set on the piano at the music school. He would talk about it constantly, describing the feel of the keys he had never touched and imagining the melodies he would play one day. The boy's determination grew stronger with time. Every morning, he would make sure to be at the street corner near the music center just in time to hear the first lesson of the day. He studied the way the teachers moved their hands, the expressions on the students' faces, the way the music flowed from the instrument. He learned more by watching than he ever had in any classroom. And every time he left, he would close his eyes and replay the sounds in his mind, practicing silently as he walked home. Sometimes, he would catch glimpses of other children entering the music center, carrying music sheets and bags with their instruments. They seemed confident and practiced, while he felt like an outsider, someone standing just beyond the door of a world he desperately wanted to enter. But instead of discouraging him, it only fueled his desire. He told himself that one day he would be inside, his fingers dancing across the keys, creating music that could make people stop and listen. His friends at school didn't understand this obsession. While they played games or watched cartoons, he would hum little melodies under his breath, tap rhythms on his desk, or sketch music notes in the margins of his notebook. They would sometimes laugh or tease him, calling him odd for being so absorbed in something they didn't care about. But he didn't mind. He knew this was his path, and no amount of teasing could make him give up. He had found something that made him feel alive, and he wasn't willing to let it go. On weekends, he would linger longer near the music school. Sometimes, he would hear a note that made his heart leap, a particular combination of keys that seemed to speak directly to him. He would press his hands together, wishing he could reach out and touch the instrument. Other times, the sounds would fade, replaced by the chatter of students leaving the building, and he would walk home slowly, replaying the day's music in his mind, memorizing it, learning it by heart. One rainy afternoon, the boy found himself under the awning of the music school, waiting for the downpour to ease. He could see the piano through the window, and the teacher was giving a lesson. His eyes were wide with awe, watching as the student's fingers moved so quickly and gracefully. He felt a mix of longing and excitement, imagining that one day it could be him. The teacher noticed him for a brief moment and offered a small smile, but did not call him inside. He didn't mind the slight acknowledgement. Even a glance was encouragement in its own way. That day, as he trudged home through the wet streets, he whispered the notes to himself, tapping them on his legs as if they were keys. He imagined how it would feel to actually touch a real piano, to feel the wood beneath his fingers and hear the resonance of each note. The longing was almost painful, but it was also beautiful, a kind of hope that kept him going. He promised himself he would not stop. One day, somehow, he would play. Evenings were often spent listening to recordings of famous pianists. He would close his eyes and follow the movements of their hands, imagining himself in their place. Each note became a story, each melody a world he could enter. Music was no longer just something he liked. It was a part of who he was, a source of joy, comfort, and purpose. It made him feel understood, even when nobody else seemed to know what he was feeling. As time passed, the boy's passion only deepened. He started writing little compositions in a notebook, recording the songs he had learned by ear and adding his own twists. He would hum them to himself as he went about his day, each melody a reminder of the piano waiting for him at the music center. People around him began to notice his dedication, impressed by the patience and focus he showed for something so intangible. He was patient, though. He didn't try to force his way in or demand attention. He believed that if he waited and proved his dedication, the right moment would come. Every day he returned to the music center. Every day he listened. Every day he imagined his fingers on the keys. He dreamed of the moment when someone would finally let him play, and he would show them what he could do. By the time he reached the edge of adolescence, the boy had become a quiet figure in the neighborhood. People knew him as the child who always lingered near the music center, always watching, always listening. But they also saw the sparkle in his eyes, a quiet determination that set him apart. It was clear that this was not a passing interest. This was the calling of someone who had found his passion and would not let go. And so he waited, each day bringing him closer to the moment he longed for. Each note he imagined, each rhythm he practiced silently was preparation. He didn't know when the day would come, but he knew it would, because his desire was too strong, his love for the piano too deep. Music had chosen him, and he was ready to answer whenever the opportunity finally arrived. The boy had been watching and imagining for years, and now he felt ready. One afternoon after school, he approached the music center again. His heart was pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from excitement. Today he decided he would ask for permission to touch the piano. He rehearsed the words in his mind as he walked up the steps, thinking carefully about how to explain his love for music and his desire to play. When he reached the entrance, the music teacher noticed him immediately. The teacher had seen him there many times, standing silently and listening to the lessons. There was curiosity in the teacher's eyes, but also caution. They had a rule that no one could touch the piano without lessons. The boy took a deep breath and spoke in a steady voice. "Please, may I try the piano? Just for a moment." The teacher looked at him, weighing the request. There were other students waiting for their lessons, and the piano was expensive, delicate, and not something to hand over casually. "I'm sorry," the teacher said gently. "You can't play today. The piano is only for students with lessons." The boy's shoulders sank a little, but he didn't leave. Instead, he knelt near the steps and started talking about the music he had been learning in his mind. He explained how he could hear the melodies and imagine the movements of the fingers, how he could see the rhythm in his head, and how music was the most important thing in his life. "I just want to try," he said. "I promise I won't break anything. I just want to feel it, to touch it once." The teacher shook their head slowly, unsure how to respond. The boy's pleading was sincere, and there was something in his eyes that made the teacher pause. Still, the rules were rules. "I'm sorry," they repeated, kindly but firmly. "I can't let you today." The boy didn't give up. He sat quietly nearby, listening to the other students' lessons, paying attention to every note, every movement. Even though he wasn't allowed to play, he absorbed everything he could. He imitated the finger movements on his knees, practicing the same positions and imagining how the keys felt. Hours could pass like this, and he never grew bored. Every time the teacher's gaze drifted to him, he smiled politely, not wanting to seem disrespectful. Days turned into weeks, and the boy continued his visits. He would arrive early, lingering near the entrance, observing each lesson from a distance. Sometimes the students would glance at him, sometimes they would ignore him, but he didn't mind. It wasn't about being noticed, it was about being close to the piano. Every melody that came through the open doors was like a spark, lighting something inside him that could not be extinguished. One afternoon, the teacher asked him to sit down and explain why he loved music so much. The boy spoke with honesty, his words flowing as naturally as the melodies in his mind. He told about the songs he heard on the street, the melodies he practiced silently at home, the rhythms he tapped on the table, and the compositions he had written in his notebook. He explained that music was more than a hobby. It was a language he could understand, a feeling he needed in his life. The teacher listened carefully, surprised by the depth of his understanding for someone so young. Even with the teacher listening, the boy did not get to play that day. The piano remained off-limits, but there was a change in the way the teacher looked at him. There was recognition now, a spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, this boy could do something special. The teacher encouraged him to keep observing, to continue learning from listening and watching. It was not the same as playing, but it was a small step forward. Determined to prove himself, the boy began visiting the library and studying books about music theory. He read about scales, chords, and the basics of rhythm. He copied the diagrams and tried to memorize them, knowing that knowledge would prepare him for the day he was finally allowed to play. Every evening, he practiced on his tiny keyboard at home, careful to follow the techniques he had seen in the lessons. Each day he grew more confident, more capable, more ready. Despite his progress, rejection still stung. There were moments when he felt frustrated, moments when he wanted to walk away and give up. But each time, he reminded himself of why he loved music and why he could not quit. He remembered the melodies that had first captured his heart and the joy he felt when he imagined playing the piano. That joy was stronger than any disappointment. The boy's parents noticed the change in him. He was more focused, more disciplined, and more passionate than ever. They saw how he carried himself, how he spoke about music, how his eyes lit up when he heard a piano. They offered support in small ways, bringing him sheets of music, saving for lessons, encouraging him to keep trying. But they also knew the boy had a stubborn independence. He was determined to reach the piano on his own terms. Then, one day, an opportunity arose. The teacher was busy helping a group of students, and the music room was quieter than usual. The boy approached once again, hands slightly trembling, and asked softly, "Could I try just one note? Just one?" The teacher hesitated. The boy's persistence had been remarkable, and now there was a chance to see if his dedication matched his talent. After a long pause, the teacher nodded, saying, "One note, just one. Be careful." The boy's eyes widened with excitement. He walked to the piano slowly, reverently, feeling as though he were approaching something sacred. He lifted his fingers and touched a key. The note rang out, simple and pure, and the boy felt a thrill like nothing he had ever experienced. It was everything he had imagined, and more. He pressed another key, and then another, testing small sequences of notes he had been practicing in his mind. The teacher watched silently, surprised at the control and sensitivity the boy had. For a few brief minutes, the boy played. Each note was measured, each sound intentional, and the tiny melody he created was beautiful in its simplicity. The teacher could not help but smile, realizing that the boy's talent was genuine, that his persistence had been more than just stubbornness. It was dedication and passion manifesting itself through music. The boy stepped back from the piano, breathless, filled with joy and pride. Even a few minutes had made him feel as though he had touched a dream he had carried for years. From that day on, the teacher began to consider allowing him more opportunities. They didn't promise lessons immediately, But the boy's dedication could no longer be ignored. He was allowed to observe more closely, practice small exercises, and learn from the students around him. The door to the piano was no longer completely closed. It was beginning to open, and the boy felt hope like he had never felt before. His routine changed subtly. He continued visiting the music center daily, but now he stayed a little longer, practicing small movements in his mind and sometimes on the tiny keyboard at home. He became more disciplined, more patient, and more observant. Each lesson he watched, each sound he heard, became a building block, shaping him into the musician he was slowly becoming. And although he still longed to play more, he understood that patience was part of the process, that waiting was preparing him for the moment when he would finally be able to let his fingers create real music on the piano. The boy's heart raced every time he approached the music center now. That brief moment when he had pressed the piano keys had left a mark that nothing else could replace. It was like touching a piece of the world he had always dreamed of. A world he knew he belonged in even though he had only stepped in for a few seconds. From that day, he returned every afternoon, standing a little closer to the piano, listening more carefully, and imagining the music he could create. He started noticing small details that had escaped him before. The way the teacher moved their hands across the keys, how a student adjusted their posture to play more smoothly, and the subtle changes in tempo that made a melody feel alive. Each observation became a lesson in itself. He would replicate the movements at home on his little keyboard or even on the edge of the table, practicing the same positions, the same motions, perfecting the fluidity of his fingers even without the real instrument. One day, the teacher called him over to the side and asked about his practice. The boy explained how he had been copying finger positions, memorizing the notes of simple songs, and imagining the music in his mind. The teacher's expression changed from polite curiosity to something more impressed. They started letting him come closer during lessons, sitting at the edge of the room so he could watch the students play and learn in real time. It wasn't yet the piano itself, but it was progress, and he savored every moment. As the days passed, the boy began experimenting mentally. He would compose short melodies in his head, replaying them over and over, imagining the touch of the keys, the vibrations of each note. Sometimes, he would hum quietly to himself, walking down the street, making sure no one else could hear. It was a secret practice, a private world that only he could enter. It made him feel strong, confident, and patient. He was building skills silently, in preparation for the moment he would finally play. One afternoon, the music center was quieter than usual. A few students were finishing their lessons, and the teacher was tidying up music sheets. The boy lingered near the piano, watching intently. His fingers itched to touch the keys again. He wanted to create something, even if it was just a simple tune. He understood the teacher's rules, but the temptation was overwhelming. The piano called to him, whispering possibilities he had been imagining for years. Suddenly, he noticed the teacher looking at him with a small, encouraging smile. Without words, it felt like permission. He took a slow, careful step forward, placed his hands on the keys, and let them hover for a moment, savoring the feel of the smooth surface. Then he pressed a single note. It sounded soft, but it resonated deep within him. He pressed another, then another, letting his fingers move naturally, guided by the melodies he had carried in his mind for so long. The sound was simple at first, but soon it grew into a recognizable tune. The teacher stopped tidying up and watched silently. The boy didn't notice at first. He was lost in the music. He wasn't thinking about impressing anyone or following rules. He was creating, expressing, and finally connecting with the piano in a way he had dreamed of for years. The notes he played carried his emotions, his longing, and his joy. Each chord was a reflection of the time he had spent waiting, imagining, and preparing. The melody flowed effortlessly, surprising even the boy himself. He realized that his hours of silent practice, observation, and imagination had prepared him for this exact moment. Every movement felt natural, every sound a part of him. The teacher's eyes widened with astonishment. They had never seen such precision and emotion from a child with so little formal instruction. It was as if the piano itself recognized the boy's dedication and allowed him to speak through it. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed was heavy with awe. The teacher clapped softly, a gesture that felt like validation after years of longing. The boy stepped back, cheeks flushed, heart racing. For the first time, he felt that he truly belonged in that space. It wasn't just a fleeting opportunity. It was a glimpse of the future he had been working toward all his life. The piano had accepted him, and he had accepted it. From that day forward, the boy's visits changed. He was allowed to practice small exercises on the piano under the teacher's supervision. They introduced him to scales, simple songs, and finger exercises to strengthen his hands. Each day he improved, growing more confident and precise. But more than that, he began to develop a personal connection with the instrument. He was learning to speak through music, expressing feelings he could not yet put into words. The boy's parents noticed the difference in him. He walked with a new sense of purpose, spoke with more confidence, and shared his excitement for music like never before. They were amazed at the dedication and patience he had developed. He would come home each day, exhausted but happy, humming the melodies he had learned and imagining the ones he would create next. Music had become his refuge, his joy, and his voice. The neighborhood began to take notice too. People who had seen him standing near the music center for years started asking about him. They were curious about the boy who had been so persistent and patient. When they heard him play, even in brief moments, they were amazed. His music was simple yet powerful, carrying a depth that belied his age and experience. Word spread slowly, and soon he was known not just for his persistence, but for his talent. Despite the progress, the boy remained humble. He knew he still had much to learn. Every new song, every new technique, felt like another step on a long journey. But he no longer felt the sting of rejection. He had touched the piano, felt its power, and discovered the magic that had been calling him for so long. Now, every lesson, every practice session, and every melody played was a continuation of that moment, a step closer to mastering the instrument he loved. The boy also began connecting with other students. He watched them play, shared tips, and sometimes exchanged melodies. Though he was still technically an outsider, he felt included in a new way. Music had become not just a personal refuge, but a bridge to others who shared his passion. He began to understand that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, patience, and the willingness to learn from others were equally important. At home, he experimented with composing short pieces. He would sit at his small keyboard and create melodies that he would later play on the real piano at the music center. Each composition reflected his experiences, his emotions, and his growth. It was a private celebration of his journey, a way to express himself beyond what anyone else could see or hear. Music had become his language, and he was learning to speak it fluently. One afternoon, the teacher asked him to play in front of a small group of students. The boy hesitated at first, nerves threatening to overwhelm him. But then he remembered the joy he had felt the first time he touched the piano, and he stepped forward. As his fingers danced across the keys, the students were captivated. They listened quietly, sensing the passion and skill behind each note. For the boy, it was a revelation. Music had the power to connect, to move, and to inspire. He was no longer just playing for himself. He was sharing a piece of his heart with others. The experience boosted his confidence. He began to practice with purpose, not just for the joy of playing, but also to prepare for opportunities to share his music. He experimented with rhythm, tempo, and expression, learning to convey emotions through sound. Each session was a new discovery, a chance to push the boundaries of his abilities and explore the depths of his creativity. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a partner, a friend, and a teacher in its own right. As weeks turned into months, the boy's skills continued to grow. The teacher began to trust him with more independence, allowing him to explore the piano without constant supervision. Each day he felt a sense of freedom, the joy of creating music without constraints. Yet he never forgot the years of waiting, observing, and imagining that had brought him to this point. Those years had shaped him, instilled patience, and prepared him for the responsibility of playing the instrument he loved so dearly. Through it all, the boy's connection to music deepened. He discovered that playing the piano was not just about hitting the right notes, but about expressing feelings, telling stories, and communicating in a language that words could not capture. He felt a sense of fulfillment that no other activity had ever given him. Music had become a vital part of his identity, a source of strength, joy, and purpose. And it all began with patience, persistence, and the courage to ask, even when the answer might have been no. The boy had been practicing diligently for months now, and each day he felt a new sense of freedom with the piano. He knew the keys so well, each note like an old friend, and his fingers moved naturally across them. What had begun as hesitant touches had now become confident, flowing movements. But he had not yet performed in front of anyone outside the small circle of students at the music center. He had felt ready to share his music for a long time, yet a part of him was still nervous, unsure if the magic he felt when he played alone would carry over to others. One afternoon, the music teacher approached him with an unusual proposal. There would be a small gathering at the community center, a casual recital where students could perform for family, friends, and neighbors. It wasn't a big stage, but it was an audience nonetheless. The boy's heart leapt. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to show what his dedication had produced. But excitement was mixed with anxiety. What if he made a mistake? What if the music didn't come alive for others the way it did for him alone? The teacher noticed his hesitation and offered gentle encouragement. "You have been practicing so well," they said. "You know the piano. You understand the music. Trust yourself, and your fingers will speak." The boy nodded, taking a deep breath. He knew the teacher was right. All those months of observing, imagining, and practicing had prepared him for this moment. It was time to let the music flow. On the day of the recital, the boy arrived early, his nerves and excitement intertwining. The small hall was quiet, chairs arranged neatly, and a few students warming up. He found a spot near the piano, touching it lightly as he had so many times before, feeling its smooth surface and familiar keys. Each touch was a reassurance, a silent promise that he could do this. As the audience began to arrive, he watched quietly, taking note of the faces, the expressions, and the way the room seemed to hold a quiet anticipation. Finally, it was his turn. The teacher led him to the piano, and he sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. The audience watched expectantly, some smiling encouragingly, others silently curious. The boy lifted his fingers and paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. Then, almost instinctively, he began to play. The first notes were soft and tentative, but they carried a purity that immediately drew the listeners in. As he continued, his confidence grew, and the music flowed naturally, effortlessly. Each chord, each melody, seemed to emerge from him as if it had been waiting there all along, ready to be expressed. The room grew still, the audience captivated by the beauty of the sounds and the emotions they carried. The boy was no longer thinking about mistakes or judgment. He was immersed in the music, feeling it through every finger, every movement. The notes told a story, one of longing, hope, and triumph. They reflected the years of patience he had spent observing, imagining, and preparing. The audience felt it too, sensing the depth of his connection with the piano, the way the music spoke directly to their hearts. A few children leaned forward in their seats, mesmerized by the precision and emotion in his playing. Parents exchanged glances, surprised by the talent and maturity of someone so young. Even the teacher, standing at the edge of the room, could not hide a smile of pride. It was clear that the boy's fingers were not just moving across the keys. They were creating something extraordinary, something that went beyond mere notes. As the final notes lingered in the air, the boy slowly lifted his hands, breathless but exhilarated. The hall remained silent for a brief moment, as if everyone was savoring what they had just heard. Then, a wave of applause erupted, warm and genuine. The boy's cheeks flushed, a mixture of relief and joy washing over him. He had shared his heart through music, and the response had been everything he could have hoped for. After the recital, people came forward to praise him. Some asked how long he had been playing, others expressed amazement at the emotion he conveyed. The boy smiled shyly, grateful for their words but mostly overwhelmed by the fact that he had finally connected with others through the music he loved. It was a validation of all the patience, perseverance, and silent practice he had devoted to the piano. That evening, the boy reflected on the performance. He thought about how far he had come. From watching the piano from the street, longing to touch it, to finally expressing himself in front of an audience. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but it had shaped him, strengthened him, and prepared him for this moment. He realized that music was more than an instrument or a skill. It was a bridge between him and the world, a way to share feelings that words could never fully capture. The recital became a turning point. The teacher encouraged him to continue performing in small gatherings, gradually building his confidence and skills. Each performance allowed him to explore new melodies, experiment with expression, and grow more comfortable sharing his music. He discovered that performing was not just about impressing others. It was about communication, connection, and the joy of creating something beautiful that could touch people's hearts. At home, the boy's parents noticed a new spark in him. He practiced with renewed energy, often replaying pieces from the recital and trying to add his own touches. He began composing small original pieces, inspired by the emotions he had felt while performing and the reactions of those who had listened. Music had become both a personal refuge and a means of reaching out to others, a language that transcended words and allowed him to express his deepest thoughts and feelings. The boy also began to form connections with other students at the music center. They would share tips, exchange melodies, and sometimes collaborate on simple duets. He realized that music could bring people together, create bonds, and foster understanding. The piano, once a distant dream, had now become a shared space, a medium through which friendships and connections could grow. As weeks passed, the boy's confidence continued to rise. Each time he performed, even for small groups, he discovered new ways to express himself, adding subtle variations to melodies, experimenting with rhythm, and exploring the emotional depth of each piece. The music became an extension of himself, a reflection of his experiences, his feelings, and his growth. He was no longer simply a boy who longed to touch the piano. He was a musician, capable of creating beauty and inspiring others. Through all of this, the boy never forgot the journey that had brought him to this point. He remembered the long hours of observing from the street, the patience required to wait for permission, the small victories of touching the keys for the first time, and the guidance of the teacher who had believed in him. Each memory reinforced his dedication and reminded him of the importance of perseverance, passion, and the courage to pursue a dream. The recital and the moments that followed became a story that people remembered. The boy's journey, from a child standing outside the music center longing to touch the piano, to a young musician sharing his gift with an audience, inspired others. It was a testament to the power of patience, persistence, and love for one's passion. The music he created was not just entertainment. It was a reminder that dreams, no matter how distant they may seem, could be realized with dedication and heart. And so, the boy continued on his path, practicing, performing, and exploring new melodies. Each day brought new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities to share his music. The piano had become a lifelong companion, a source of joy, expression, and connection. He understood now that the magic he had felt when he first touched the keys was not just in the piano itself, but in the journey, the effort, and the unwavering belief in his own potential. The music and the wonder it could create was now a part of him forever. The boy had come a long way since the first day he had pleaded to touch the piano. What had once been a distant dream was now a daily reality. He practiced diligently, performed with confidence, and shared his music with anyone willing to listen. But beyond the notes and melodies, the boy discovered something even more important: the power of persistence, patience, and believing in oneself. Each morning, he would walk to the music center with a sense of purpose. The keys beneath his fingers no longer felt like a foreign object. They were an extension of himself, a means of expression and connection. His compositions grew more complex, and he began experimenting with rhythm, tempo, and emotion. Every melody he created told a story, capturing feelings that words could not fully convey. The music teacher continued to guide him, offering insights, techniques, and encouragement. But the boy's progress was no longer just about lessons. He had developed a keen ear, an intuition for melody, and a deep understanding of the piano. Sometimes, the teacher would step back and watch silently, amazed at how naturally the boy's fingers danced across the keys, creating harmonies that were both simple and profound. Word of the boy's talent spread through the neighborhood. People who had seen him watching from the street years ago now spoke of the young musician who could captivate any audience. Children from school began to take an interest in music, inspired by his dedication and passion. Even the local community started to hold small gatherings where he could perform, each audience growing larger and more appreciative. He became a symbol of hope, showing that persistence and love for one's craft could open doors that once seemed closed. At home, his parents watched with pride and awe. They remembered the long hours he had spent practicing on a tiny keyboard, the patient observation at the music center, and the countless times he had imagined melodies in his mind. Now, they saw the results of that dedication, an artist who could touch hearts with the music he created. They offered their support in every way they could, attending performances, helping with sheet music, and celebrating each achievement. Yet, they also gave him space to explore, knowing that his journey was uniquely his own. The boy's approach to music had changed over time. He no longer played solely for himself, but for others as well. Each performance was an opportunity to share his feelings, tell a story, and connect with listeners. Sometimes he played for friends, sometimes for family, and sometimes for strangers who had never heard him before. Every time, he felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause. He was communicating, touching lives in a way that transcended words. One day, the music teacher arranged for the boy to perform at a larger community event. The hall was filled with families, children, and local residents, all eager to hear the young pianist. The boy felt the familiar rush of nerves, but he remembered the first time he had touched the piano and the months of patient practice that had followed. He took a deep breath, sat at the keys, and let his fingers move. The music that flowed was rich, expressive, and full of life. It was a culmination of his journey, a testament to his talent and perseverance. The audience was mesmerized. They listened in silence, completely absorbed by the melodies that seemed to carry emotion directly from the boy's heart. When the final note lingered in the air and faded, there was a moment of quiet reflection, followed by a wave of applause that seemed to fill the entire hall. The boy's cheeks flushed, but he felt more than pride, he felt connection. He had shared a piece of himself, and the response was a confirmation that music could bridge gaps, touch souls, and create understanding. After the performance, people approached him with words of admiration. Some asked how long he had been playing, others inquired about his favorite pieces, and many simply expressed awe at the beauty he had created. The boy listened quietly, smiling, grateful for their appreciation, but more aware than ever that his journey was about more than recognition. It was about expression, growth, and the ability to inspire others to pursue their own passions. He continued to explore music in new ways. He experimented with composing, creating original pieces that reflected his emotions, experiences, and dreams. Sometimes, he would write a melody inspired by the stories of friends or the beauty of the world around him. Each composition was a personal achievement, a way to grow as a musician and as an individual. He realized that music was not static. It was alive, evolving with him and the world he experienced. The boy also began mentoring other children who showed interest in music. He shared tips, demonstrated techniques, and encouraged them to observe, practice, and imagine. He understood the importance of patience and persistence, having experienced firsthand the challenges of waiting for an opportunity. Through teaching, he found a new dimension to his love for music, the joy of helping others discover their potential, and the satisfaction of seeing someone else's eyes light up when they first touch a key and create a melody. Despite his growing skill and recognition, the boy remained humble. He remembered the years of longing and watching, the times he had been turned away, and the patience required to finally touch the piano. These memories kept him grounded, reminding him that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, respect, and love for the craft were equally essential. He never took the piano or his opportunities for granted. Every practice, every performance, and every composition was a chance to honor the journey that had brought him here. The music center became a second home for the boy. He spent hours there, learning, practicing, and sharing melodies. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a partner, a confidant, and a bridge to the world around him. He found comfort in its presence, inspiration in its response, and purpose in the music he created. Each day, he discovered new possibilities, new harmonies, and new ways to express himself. His story became an inspiration for many in the community. People spoke of the boy who had waited patiently, observed diligently, and never given up on his dream. They admired not only his talent but also his perseverance, humility, and dedication. Parents encouraged their children to follow his example, to pursue passions with heart and patience, and to understand that the journey is as important as the destination. As the boy grew older, he continued to perform, compose, and mentor others. His music evolved with him, reflecting his experiences, emotions, and understanding of the world. He played not only to create beautiful sounds but to tell stories, inspire listeners, and connect with people in ways that words could not. Each performance was a reminder of how far he had come, from the first day he had begged to touch the piano to the moment he could share his gift with the world. The boy's journey demonstrated that passion, patience, and perseverance could overcome obstacles. He had learned that opportunities might not come immediately, that rules sometimes stand in the way, and that success requires dedication. But he had also discovered that love for one's craft, combined with persistence, could create moments of magic. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a teacher, a companion, and a key to a future filled with creativity and connection. And so, the boy continued to play. Each note, each melody, each composition was a celebration of the journey he had taken. He knew that the piano would always be there, waiting for him, offering new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to express himself. He had transformed from a boy who longed to touch the piano into a young musician whose fingers created wonder, whose music inspired others, and whose dedication showed that dreams, no matter how distant, could become reality when pursued with heart and determination. The story of the boy and the piano became a reminder to everyone who heard it, that patience and persistence can open doors, that talent must be nurtured with love and dedication, and that the beauty of creation is in the journey as much as in the result. The boy's music would continue to resonate, not only in the notes he played but in the hearts he touched, inspiring others to find their own melodies and to never give up on the dreams that called to them.